This past 2 weeks, as Israel and Iran were arm wrestling, there was much talk from a point of fear of what other people want to call potentially third world war. And I've been at pains. I've been really trying hard to convince people the world will never experience a third world war, because the world that was subjected to a European war, which later came to be called the First and the Second World War, is no longer what it was then. And I noticed that most people think of a world war as a war where every country is going to be affected militarily. I said, look, we might have a nuclear confrontation, we might have a nuclear bomb being dropped in one or two cities or one or two countries as a result of two countries fighting it out. But a world war whereby someone in South Africa is going to be affected is not going to be a military one, primarily because the world is already going through a third world war. And when it comes, and when it moves into a space whereby everybody feels it, the adversary or the bully is going to be the United States of America. The First World War, they'll tell you the bully was Germany. Second World War, the bully was Germany. And usually a war is when a bully is being confronted by the minions, or a hegemony is confronted by minions. That's when it's actually a war. But when a hegemony goes out and tries to trample on small countries, it's not a war. As you see with situations in Gaza where people will say there's a war, there's no war there because it's a hegemony that's going and trampling on resistance fighters. It's a war when resistance fighters fight against the hegemony. That is why it will be called a war. Now, why am I saying a military third world war is not going to be possible? Because first of all, the reason why the first and the second are called world wars is because the world was colonized at the time. England, when it was fighting Germany, it dragged all its colonies, it dragged India, dragged South Africa, dragged almost all its colonies, and it dragged them, took its soldiers as natives to war, and then they said, look, Burma was fighting, as South Africa also fought, India also fought, but those countries didn't actually have any beef. They didn't have any beef with Adolf Hitler because the policies of Adolf Hitler, the expansionist policies of the Nazi Party and the Fourth Reich were actually Fourth Reich were more prevalent, were more targeting Europe and not the whole world. But maybe at some stage they might have. But even when you look at the campaigns that happened in El Alamein in Egypt and Libya and other areas, it was simply because there were residual, there were British colonies, and then the war was taken there. Your General Erwin Rommel going on with the Africa Corps because there were colonies and Germany wanted to expand and just grab part of the colonies. So today you cannot have a situation whereby a country, let's say Russia, fights against the United States and then they decide, let us go and grab Burundi or Rwanda or DRC, because those are not American colonies. So those countries are not going to be affected by any kinetic confrontation that happens in Europe. So, and initially I said, there has really even never been a world war. They'll tell about the shaping of South Africa. They call them Fekani, when the borders of different communities, different nations, the Zulus, Ndebele, Shangaan, Mapulana, Venda, Bavenda, Vatsonga, all when they were being shaped, and there was all these wars, wars of attrition, they'll say that was the Fekani, because no one outside was involved. But imagine if we were able to involve India to come and fight on the side of the Zulus, to get Brazil to come and fight on the side of the Ndebele, to get Argentina to come and fight on the side of Vatsonga. That would have been a world war because it would have involved world power. So that's why they call things world wars, even when they're just European Fekani is what it was. That's what the Second World War was, because Adolf Hitler just wanted to expand and swallow and build a bigger nation. What he was going all out to get a Lebensraum, a living space for the German, for the Iron Race. He called him the Iron Race. He was going to get more space, more countries to succumb to him. And that was Fekani, European Fekani. But because England and France and Portugal and Belgium, they all had colonies, they dragged Burundi, they dragged Rwanda, they dragged South Africa, they dragged all these countries, and then they called it a world war. Now, the conflagration that happened a couple of weeks ago between Iran and Israel, there was no way it was going to result in a military confrontation world war, because even Iran was fighting alone. No one was coming to its aid. Israel was being assisted by the United States. So which means at worst, if America was to fight against Russia, it will be NATO countries that will fight against Russia. So you're not going to get Mozambique or Lesotho or Tanzania fighting as well, because it's got nothing to do with them. But a third world war, or what I'll call a first world war, has already been waged. It was waged by Donald Trump some couple of months ago when he came with global tariffs, what he called the Liberation Day tariffs, where you just go around and you declare economic war on everyone else. Lesotho, 60% tariff, South Africa, 50% tariff, China. When he was imposing tariffs on every single country in the world, even islands, there are islands whereby only penguins live, the penguin islands, like your nature conservation islands, they were imposed with tariffs as if like there's something that penguins are going to sell to the United States, or as if there's something that they buy from the United States. So that was a world war. The world war that's going to happen is going to be an economic war. It's going to be a hegemon like the United States, believing that, because we are trading with everyone else, now we're going to impose tariffs on them, bringing things into our economy. Just like rolling back the whole concept of a globalization, because the whole globalization project was about creating a global village whereby we can be able to sell each other what we don't have, we buy from them what they don't have, we sell from them what we have, and we get rid of the tariffs. Don't make it impossible or difficult for people to access the markets, because not every country will have gold. The Arab countries, they've got oil, they've got gas, but the soil is desert, they don't have food. So they need to buy food from countries that are arable, countries with soil that produces food. South Africa being one of those countries. United States being one of those. They need to buy meat from countries that are doing ranching, Brazil, United States, and others. They need to buy milk from New Zealand. New Zealand is a leader in production of milk. They've got more cattle, they've got more cows than human beings living there. So they need to buy milk from those countries. So in a way, they'll say, give us milk, and then we'll give you oil, or we'll give you gas. So when you start imposing tariffs and say, look, you cannot bring your gas to us without us charging a tariff on it, the question now arises, where are you going to get gas? Because you can't produce gas locally. Because the whole point of tariffs is come here and produce amongst us, come and produce in our country. But you cannot produce gas where there's no gas. You can't produce milk and cheese and yogurt in a country where there are no cattle, where there's more people than cattle, instead of New Zealand where there are more cattle than human beings. And also the whole concept of tariffs. Tariffs were intended when they were created as an instrument to be tools of war, of when you are having a military confrontation, but you cannot live without that country, because the country is supplying you with wool, and you need wool, or supplying you with cotton, and you need cotton to make your soldiers' uniform. They supply you with milk, you need milk for your soldiers, supply with flour. Now, because we are at war, military confrontation, we charge them to bring things to us. They charge. So it's more of a tool that you use to punish each other in times when there is war. You can be able to impose tariffs on other countries that you don't get along with. But those are not things you impose on countries you get along with. So let's say a world war, not a third world war, because we never actually had the first and second. Maybe we can say they were first and second by virtue of the colonies being dragged and their soldiers dying, India losing more people than England itself that dragged into that war. We can say they were world wars, but actually the real world war, it will be an economic war. On one side will be the United States, on the other side will be the global South countries. Global South, I'm talking about what's so-called developing countries, and China will be amongst those. The European Union can be, I'm sure the European Union will be protected by the United States from such tariffs, because they'll have trade deals between each countries. But the real world war, it will be an economic war, and it's important for countries to start preparing for that economic war the very same way that countries prepare for a military confrontation. Insulation. How will Africa and African countries, global South countries, be insulated when the United States finally goes out and declares war on everyone else? That will be the next solution, and that's where the mineral industrial complex, the food industrial complex, it comes to being, to say countries must start developing those industries so that they must have enough ammunition to face the one giant, that's the United States, that has every intention of waging that war against everyone else. If I've seen them try to take the world when Donald Trump spoke about Liberation Day, which actually happened to be a fluke, because TECO, as it's now being called, will always retreat when it's being faced by resistance. Now, like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share with your friends. Make sure that we are building the circle. The circle becomes far bigger.